Welcome back to another episode of the Dr. SuperCoach podcast. You're on with Pig Mentality. I'm back to give you my recommendations for the captain armband for this week. A slight update on the tech side of things. I've got a new mic, so hopefully it's starting to sound a bit better. We're still not quite ready for video capability yet, but potentially next week, so stay tuned with that. So, round one is in the books. I hope you had a reasonable score last week, or at least had a good weekend with your vice captain or captain. As I said last week, in these early rounds, we're still using 2023 data to pick our captains. Some of this data will still be relevant, but some of it's outdated. So with that in mind, I still recommend taking any VC score above 115, probably for the first month of the season. As the year goes on and we get more accurate stats on which teams are easy to score against, this line will increase. In last week's video, I said that I plan to go either VC, Daicos or Green into a max score captain. That was because I didn't think I had any loophole in my rucks for the Sunday. But thanks to an eagle-eyed Dr. SuperCoach Slack member, pointed out that I could do the old bench Grundy Captain Livingston move, which allowed me to VC Gawn. So that's what I ended up doing. So shout out to them. If you're liking these videos, feel free to follow me on Twitter at pig_DRSC for more SuperCoach or just VC chat in general. So as again, I'm going to give you 3 vice captains, 5 captains, and then a pod option as well. So we might as well start. So my third favourite vice captain option this week is Max Gawn. So if you have a Sunday loophole, you should be able to make a Saturday VC work. So a lot of people have Zach Williams, or if you've got some other bench buy player, you could make this work pretty easily. So Max is a bit of a conundrum in this game. So on one hand, he averages 132 points over his entire career against Hawthorn, and that's from 11 matches, so a fair sample size. And he averages 110 at the MCG. But his last 2 meetings with Hawthorn last year, he was limited to scores of 94 and 91. So should that scare us? Well, when he scored the 94 last year, he was ruck sharing with Brodie Grundy, and he actually attended less ruck contests than Grundy did. So that 94 I don't think is really an accurate reflection. But at the end of the year last year, he did score a 91 on them. He was limited to a 91, and he was solo ruck, and he was rucking against Ned Reeves without Lloyd Meek, which is I'm expecting that to be the case on Saturday as well. I'm recording this Wednesday night, so I don't know their teams yet, but I'm expecting it to be the same matchup essentially. And he only scored a 91, so that's probably a more accurate representation. But that game was also in the middle of a 3-game stretch where he only averaged 80 to finish the season. And we know before that stretch he was going bananas, including a 200. So I guess you just need to decide which max we're getting here. Are we getting the one with a 132 average against the Hawks? Or are we getting the one that put up a 91 in this exact same matchup last year? It was against Reeves. We know Reeves can restrict an opposition ruckman. He's quite a good tap hit-out guy, so for this reason, I think Max is a really good VC option, but I probably wouldn't be comfortable putting the C on him just because he does have that kind of 91 last year. But I'm still very much considering him. Nick Daicos is my number 2 vice-captain option. Someone in Slack commented last week that Nick Daicos playing all these early games will probably put me out of job for doing this captaincy video. And they could be right. Like, he's just such a safe bet for a VC option every single week. So Daicos has only played the Saints twice in his career for scores of 98 and 128, which sounds really nice. But that was when he was playing as a defender. And St Kilda give up the most points to opposition defenders last year in 2023. Now that Daicos has moved into a full-time midfield role and the Saints are in kind of a neutral matchup for midfielders, it might not be as juicy as last year. Having said that, Dangerfield managed a 134 on the Saints last week, and Nick's good enough to get off the chain and score against anyone that doesn't put attention into him. There is some talk that maybe Windhager does put some attention to him, so that's something to think about. But I think it's still a very easy VC selection here for Daicos. You just chuck the VC on him, have a punt. If it doesn't work, find a safe fallback captain. But my number 1 vice-captain option here is Caleb Sarong. So Caleb catapulted his owners up the ranking late Sunday night with a monster 170. I'm not expecting him to repeat that, and neither should you. But he does play against North Melbourne this weekend, who were one of the easiest teams for inside midfielders to score against in 2023. and that's what Caleb does. That trend looks set to continue with Tom Green scoring 152, Josh Kelly 116, and Stephen Cornelia 113, all dominating against the Kangaroos in round one. The only worry I have with Sarong here is his career average of only 83 at Marvel Stadium, and that comes from 10 matches, so it's a reasonable sample size. So that 83 career average at Marvel, that's probably enough for me to say I don't want to trust Captain Caleb with the captaincy, but I'm absolutely happy to chuck a VC armband and kind of let him go to work in that. And that's because of his giant ceiling and the Kangaroos matchup. So he's my number one VC recommendation, but I'm not super confident enough yet just because of the Marvel history. I might not captain him if I had him. I'm now going to give you my pod point of difference captain, and this is probably one that I'd recommend vice captaining rather than captaining, so that's why I mention it here. And that is Isaac Heaney. So you might not think of Heaney as much of a pod anymore, after he's averaged 140 over his first two games, and he's been one of the most traded in players this week. But I do believe he's kind of a pod from a captaincy perspective. I don't think there'll be that many people captaining him. The reason I think a lot of coaches will be spending their vice captain early in the week, like they might spend it on a Daicos or a Laird or a Sarong type. And if that kind of VC fails, I don't really expect many of the serious coaches will have the courage to put the captaincy on Heaney. So if you want to save your vice captain for him, which you can do if you have kind of a bye-playing loop player, or if you happen to be brave enough to put the C on him, I do think it could reward you. Essendon were easy matchup for inside midfielders in 2023. I do believe they'll be a bit harder this year, just with Goldstein coming across and kind of providing a better ruck contest. They just won't be as bad in there. But I don't think it's really much of a difference. So a player of Heaney's quality, kind of in this kind of form, at his home ground that's known for extra stoppages, I feel like he should kind of have a field day in this one. So if you want to get a bit point of differency and go for a Heaney vice captain, I reckon he could reward you. Now going to my captains. So the captains a little bit, especially on the Sunday, I kind of had to dig to try and even find 5 that I was happy with. So I wouldn't be against kind of doing an early VC like a Daicos and then going a C in kind of the Saturday games even, because there's some good guys here on the Sunday, but I'm probably not as confident as I was, say, last week. So number 5, Zach Butters. So Zach scored 117 last week despite only attending 61% of the CBAs. This week he plays Richmond at the MCG. His career history is actually quite underwhelming, both against Richmond and at this venue. But his 2 games against Richmond in 2023 led to a 104 at the MCG and a 158 at Adelaide Oval. I think Zach probably goes somewhere in between those 2 numbers in this game. Richmond showed they weren't total pushovers last week, and Port will be wanting to give their number one midfielder more than the 61% CBAs this week, you would think. Zach only had 2 tackles last game as week, 2 tackles last week as well, which is a bit of an anomaly. So I expect his CBAs and his tackle numbers to probably get back closer to the norm, which is probably good news for Supercoach owners. So I classify this one as kind of a safe fallback captain option, like I'm thinking an easy 115 with the potential for more. I don't think it'll be huge, but I think it'll be really safe. Number 4, Kieran Briggs. You might think this is a bit strange that I'm recommending someone as a safe captain option when they scored a 57 last week. You might think it's even more strange when they've never played against this opponent or played at this ground, so we don't really have any data on it. And maybe it is a bit wacky. But I think Kieran Briggs owners are entitled to get a bit wacky this weekend because Briggs faces the West Coast Eagles, who are the easiest matchup for opposition ruckman in 2023. And this doesn't really look like changing because they just gave up 125 points to Ivan Soldo in round 1. And Soldo is a guy that most experts project to score in the 90s this year. So the fact that he put 125 up on them is pretty huge. The ruck duo of Bailey Williams and Callum Jamieson win the lowest percentage of hitouts per ruck contest of any team. So that leaves a lot of points on the board for their opponents. Briggs was destroyed in the hitout battle last week by Tristan Jerry, and that was kind of expected actually. Cherry's one of the best ruckmen in that category in terms of winning the hitouts in most of his ruck battles. So this week, he gets a soft matchup. I think he's got a bit of a personal point to prove after he really did get beaten last week. So just based on that alone, I think we can see a 120 here from Briggsy on Sunday evening simply because he plays West Coast and they're the easiest matchup for ruckman. Number 3, Zach Merritt. The Zach started off the season in a nice way for his owners last week with a 127. This week he travels to the SCG to play Sydney in what has historically led to many close matchups between these two teams. Merritt has career averages of 111 against the Swans. That's from 14 career games. And, that's actually one of his favourite Supercoach matchups, so he loves playing the Swans. His last 2 scores against Sydney are a 139 and a 140, although it's worth noting both of these were played in Melbourne. The SCG is one of the highest stoppage grounds in the league, which should help any player that attends ball ups and throw-ins like Merritt does. I'm not really projecting a giant score in Merritt for this one, just with, Sydney have a better ruckman right now than they do in previous years. I think they're just generally improved and better than they were last year as well. So I'm not expecting a giant Merritt score, but I think this is a really safe 120. And I think that should be on the cards as a safe fallback option. So if you have a crack at a high ceiling VC kind of guy that doesn't pay off, I think Zach's a really, really good fallback. Number 2, Matt Rao. So it's time to start giving the grass-eating goat his dues. After averaging 146 to start the season, Rao's off to a historic start in terms of clearance and contested number of possessions. The reason I like him in this match is not necessarily him himself, but because he's playing against Tim English. Or, more accurately, because his ruckman, Jared Witts, is playing against Tim English. So the Western Bulldogs ruck duo only win the hit-out in 39% of their ruck contests. So that actually leaves a lot of hit-outs still for their opposition. And you compare that to Jared Witts, who's actually the best tuck ruckman in the game at the moment, now that Sean Darcy's injured. So, and what I mean by that is that he wins the hit-out in the most percentage of his ruck contests. So Jared Witts, when he attends a ruck contest, he generally wins a hit-out most of the time. And he's playing against Tim English, so I project Witts to absolutely destroy English in the hit-out game. This should give his midfielders first access to the ball. This will lead to Rao having another contested beast of a game. So, if you have Matt Rao, I actually think this is a perfect game to captain him. I think his ruckman's going to absolutely dominate, give him first use, and he'll be great. Then my number 1 captain option is Tom Green. So Tom Green owners started him, hoping for 2 huge scores against the 2 worst teams in the league from 2023. And, he's halfway there after posting a 152 on the Kangaroos last week. This week he plays the Eagles, who are a very easy matchup for most players last year. In round 1, the Eagles actually didn't give up the huge points we expected, but they kind of nearly did. Houston was on track for a huge score, but he went missing in the fourth quarter, barely did anything in the fourth. Rosie scored 114 despite laying 0 tackles, which is very unusual for him. As I said, Butters scored a 117 despite only attending 61% of the CBAs. So there were 3 kind of really good, 114 to 117 scores in this one from those 3. But I feel like they had the potential to go big and it just didn't quite click. Whereas I think Tom Green loves to go big. So for the year, only 2 games, but for the year, he's averaging 84% CBAs, 7.5 tackles to go along with his 34 disposals and 5 marks. So he's doing a bit of everything. And one thing I really like about captaining Tom Green is that he's very, very aware of fantasy scoring. So he was interviewed by the Traders recently, and he had a chat to them, and he was across all the different ways of scoring. And he kind of talked about trying to pick it up and get extra stats. So I know there's some players who couldn't care less about their fantasy score, but Tom does care. And that just, especially as a fallback captain option, that kind of just gives me a little bit of assuredness that he's not kind of just going to take it easy because he does care. So that's how I'm looking at the moment. I'll just recap that. My 3 vice captain options, I think Max Gawn's a good option, Nick Daicos is a good option, Caleb Sarong's a good option. Or if you're feeling a bit potty, I think Isaac Heaney's a really good option if you want to kind of skip them and go your VC on him. You could also see Heaney. That would be fairly brave, but you could do it. And then my top 5 captains to fall back on if they don't work: Zach Butters, Kieran Briggs, Zach Merritt, Matt Rao, and Tom Green. And I might just add a little bit of kind of why not these people. People might ask, I don't want to look at Tim English because he's playing against the hardest ruck matchup in the game this week. Wits really restricted him last year, and Wits restricts a lot of players. I'm not that interested in Bont and Libber, again, because English is against the hardest ruck matchup in the game. I don't think they're really going to get first use of the ball. Plus, Bond himself, he actually has a really bad history of scoring at Mars Stadium, where they're playing in Ballarat, so that just gives me a bit of hesitancy. Rowan Marshall could be all right, but he kind of just, he has a medium matchup in terms of difficulty, and he plays at a medium difficulty ground, so it's not really anything exciting. Laird and Dawson, I guess you could do, but I'm still just a little bit worried about that Crows midfield mix and how many players they have to run through there. I kind of want to see it settled and see what the outcome of that is before I captain any of them. LDU, actually, I think LDU is a genuine option against Freo. Freo have been, at least last year, gave up a lot of points to inside mid, so LDU is a fine option. I just think there are probably 3 better VC choices that I prefer. And I still just don't have full faith in captaining LDU yet for some reason. And then Petrarca and Oliver, they're an option. You could do it. The Hawks midfield actually was a little bit restrictive last year, so that's kind of why I haven't gone there. And Oliver kind of does have a low time on ground at the moment, just working his way back. So my moves for this week, I'm projecting Tom Green to be my highest scorer of the round, so Tom is absolutely going to be my captain. My VC I haven't decided yet. I'm actually going to this SCG game to watch the Bombers and the Swans live. And I am kind of tempted to put the VC on Heaney and cheer him on in person, even though it will be against my own team. So I'm not sure about that yet. If I do kind of chicken out of that and want a safer option, it'll probably be either Daicos or Gawn as my VC. But yeah, everything running into Tom Green because I think he's incredible and I think he's going to be my highest scorer of the round. So that's all from me. Feel free to touch base with me at pig_DRC and chat about these if you want. Put in the comments or wherever you want to chat, or chat to me in Slack. And I'll see you next week for the same video. Cheers.